Heraclitus is often, I think, thought of as the really radical figure of the Presocratics. He's known for this idea that kind of all things are their opposite, all things are constantly changing or always in motion. It's not entirely correct to say for Heraclitus that all things were in motion or things are constantly in flux, as we'll see. But nonetheless, this idea, this radical notion of constant change, is hugely influential, and Heraclitus is the one that really is the first to argue this kind of an idea about the rational world. So he lived in the 6th century from Ephesus of Ionia, of now current-day Turkey, near Miletus, where Thales was from. Now, Heraclitus' cosmology is interesting because it really focuses on this idea of logos. Now, logos is a very important Greek word that has many different meanings. For Heraclitus, logos is an objective, law-like principle that governs the cosmos. But we should understand more broadly, logos in the ancient Greek world meant speech, could mean articulation, justification, or reason. So we might talk about, in the same way where you're giving a speech, you're giving, a logos, an account. Or we might say, look at this kind of logos that I'm learning from you, right? This justification or something like that. But also, as we can see in the case of Heraclitus and certain others, it's more than just speech or an account of something. It's universal divine reason. It's immanent in nature. It transcends all oppositions. And it's an eternal and unchanging truth. So as where some people like the sophists really talk about or use the word logos in a sense of just a speech or an articulation or, kind of reason, Heraclitus really means logos as like capital R reason. It's that thing which is transcendent. Is that thing which isn't just transcendent, an account of things, but as an account of things, it is what makes things all possible. Now, for Heraclitus, he almost gives an opposite account of what makes possible the whole world. What is the arche behind everything? For Heraclitus, it's fire. He says that this cosmos, the same for all, none of gods nor humans made, but it was always and is and shall be, an ever-living fire, kindled in measures and extinguished in measures. The reason he argues that the universe is fire is because we see constant growth and degeneration, life and death. We see this kind of back and forth from one thing to the other of opposites, right? Life, death, growth, degeneration, good, bad, hot, cold, and so on. And yet, we have it perpetually. In the same way that with fire, we have, if we see a flame, a consistent flame that's burning, and yet it's actually tiny little flames coming in and out of existence that make possible that one persistent flame. So we can see this kind of arche, this ultimate principle that Heraclitus is trying to make sense of the universe and how the universe exists, how anything exists at all. Now, again, similar to Thales, does he really mean everything is literally fire, or is it a metaphor? Is it the same thing? Like when we talk about what fire is, that's the same thing for everything else. That's a little unclear because we don't actually have writings that survived from Heraclitus. They're all accounts given by people after his death. So we have to try to decide, to what extent is something more accurate or less. Now, for Heraclitus, the cosmos is governed by a rational order. So there's a reason why things happen the way they do. It's not just complete chaos or randomness, even though it might appear that way to us. Because the cosmos is governed by a rational order, the cosmos itself is an intelligent system. It is rationality. So the cosmos is governed by rational order, and by being governed in a sense, is itself the rational order governing itself. Now, for Heraclitus, it's not just that we have this kind of account of the world that's, in a sense, encompassing of human beings, but also separate, but that Heraclitus says human law must harmonize with divine law, with this rational order, with the cosmos. So first I want to think about this descriptively, and I want to think about this looking at some of these accounts of Heraclitus. One that says, the soul has self-increasing logos. Similar to what we saw with Thales, this idea that the soul has this kind of propensity for growth, for movement, for attraction, and so on, right? The soul has self-increasing intelligence, self-increasing reason, rationality. Those who speak with understanding, in the Greek nous, must rely firmly on what is common to all, as the city must rely on law, and much more firmly, for all human laws are nourished by one law, the divine law, for it has as much power as it wishes, and is sufficient for all, and is still left over. So descriptively, right, it seems like Heraclitus here is giving an account of, well, we have this account of how the universe, how nature kind of works, and for humans as well, we're not something separate. We also gather, in a sense. We are, perhaps as someone later on like Aristotle will say, we are animals or rational animals, right? We're still animals. We're still natural or social beings, right? We're a part of the world, and we gather in such ways that are consistent with divine law, with the laws of the cosmos. But there's also a kind of prescriptive element to this, a very early account of what's known as natural law theory. So not just descriptively, but prescriptively. Good laws are those which are as close as possible to divine law, to the laws of nature, of the world. And so to have maybe a harmonious, stable civilization, we want laws that are consistent with the natural world and that don't try to have humans perhaps behave in certain ways that are unnatural, that humans then will not behave by. And finally, we have this account of Heraclitus. To God, all things are beautiful and good and just, but humans have supposed some unjust and others just. And here we're starting to get at the kind of perception of humans, that human beings think they're over and above the cosmos, that they can determine, right, what really is good, what really is bad, what really is just, what really is unjust. And humans can be caught up in the appearances of the world and not see for what the world really is beyond appearances themselves. With Heraclitus, we don't just get a kind of metaphysics, an account of the nature of things, but we also get an inquiry into epistemology, the study of knowledge, how one comes to acquire knowledge of the world. First, for Heraclitus, to come to understand logos, one has to be attentive to the signs of the empirical world. So one does actually have to study how the world presents itself to human beings. He says, all that can be seen, heard, experienced, these are what I prefer. And although this logos holds always, humans prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. For although all things come to be or happen in accordance with this logos, humans are like the inexperienced when they experience such words and deeds as I set out, distinguishing each in accordance with its nature, its physis, and saying how it is. But other people fail to notice what they do when awake, just as they forget what they do while asleep. So one should be attentive to the empirical world, looking at signs, and we can think of signs in terms of language, right? That kind of words are signs referring to some kind of meaning behind them, some intelligent account of something. And yet, we can also be duped by signs. We can interpret them wrongly. So, one must not merely be attentive to signs of the empirical world, but for Heraclitus, one has to be critical in their inquiry and the capacity of the soul for wisdom. He says, right thinking, sophronein, is the greatest excellence, and wisdom, sophia, is to speak the truth and act in accordance with nature, physis, while paying attention to it. And it belongs to all people to know themselves and to think rightly, sophronein. So we have this kind of account here of the ability that humans have if the soul has this kind of self-increasing logos, this ability to be more and more rational, then it's through the soul we try to nourish the soul intellectually such that it can make sense of the empirical world, and we don't become duped for appearances in the world or persuasive stories that someone might tell us. We learn to become critical thinkers. So we can see then for Heraclitus, he's not just giving us cosmology, right, an account of the generation of the world, its ultimate principle. He's not just giving us an account of how human beings come to know things, but also what makes it possible for us to come to know things by nourishing the soul, by studying philosophy, truth itself. Nonetheless, what Heraclitus is most famous for, perhaps, is the fact that many of his sayings are paradoxical. This has led to this belief that it's Heraclitus' doctrine that everything is flux. This gets said in Plato's Theaetetus. So some quotes behind this idea. Upon those who step into the same rivers, different and again different waters flow. It is not possible to step into the same river. It scatters and again comes together, and approaches and recedes. What is opposed brings together. The finest harmony is composed of things at variance, and everything comes to be or occurs in accordance with strife. The road up and the road down are one and the same. And the sea is the purest and most polluted water. To fishes drinkable and bringing safety. To humans undrinkable and destructive. So how do we make sense of kind of these paradoxical statements like it's not possible to step into the same river twice? Or, it's not just the case that I'm walking down the road, so I see it as the road down. You're walking up, so you see it as the road up. But no, the road up and the road down are one and the same. So Plato had his reasons for kind of straw manning Heraclitus here and having him say in the Theaetetus that everything is flux. Likely because the point of Plato's dialogues is not to give some doctrine, some accounts of what the truth really is, but to be a kind of educational device to get you to interact with the text. And among Plato's day, many of the followers of, the long dead Heraclitus did have accounts of the world as being everything in flux. That some of them would say, well, Heraclitus was wrong. It's not the case that you can step into the same river twice, but there is no same river to step into twice. Because literally, there is nothing, again, that is the same. And so perhaps Plato in his time, right, is getting people to interact with this dominant interpretation of Heraclitus. But the more accurate interpretation of what's going on with all of these kind of paradoxical statements from Heraclitus is this idea that there is unity and opposites. So there is a kind of stability for Heraclitus. And yet, what makes possible that stability is kind of flux, a changing back and forth. So it's not just that you have unity or stability. It's not just that you have flux or opposites. It's that one makes possible the other. You can't have one without the other. And so you can't step into a river without it being a different body of water in a sense. All the things that make possible the river aren't there again, and yet the same river remains. Or the fact that it's not just the case that I perceive it as the road down and you perceive it as the road up, but literally it is both the road up and the road down, and that makes possible how I can walk up it and you walk down it. Or perhaps I think most intuitively in the case of the sea statement here, right? It's not just the case that, well, to fish it is perceived as, good, and to humans the sea is perceived as undrinkable. But it really is literally both drinkable and undrinkable. That's its nature. I think the enduring question here that we get from Heraclitus is whether this kind of paradoxical thinking is nonsense. Is it really philosophy? Why isn't that just a kind of sophistry, kind of like, witty remarks? Or is there a reason behind what Heraclitus is saying? Did he have to bring this truth out? Did he have to say it in these kind of paradoxical ways? Is the paradox key, actually, to the truth of the nature of the world.